everyone, welcome back to my channel. Welcome if you're new, which you probably are. Today I want to talk about some books that I feel like scream fall. Thank you so much for being here. I hope you have a fantastic day. I just want to say that I have quite a few books to talk about, so grab yourself a cozy drink because we're gonna be here for a while. I'm gonna talk about books that I have read, some that I have not read yet, but I want to read this fall, and this is just going to be your fall reading guide. The first book is a book that I have read and I highly recommend that you read it during the fall, and that is Penance by Susanna Clarke. I actually read this book during the winter, but in my head it was fall. This is one of those books where the less you know, the better. It's essentially a story about a man called Penance. He lives in this house with endless rooms, and he knows nothing about himself aside for his name and that he lives in this house. There's another person that sort of comes and goes to this place that Penance has conversations with, and every time he goes in to talk to this person, he's trying to gather more information about his condition, but it's quite hard. This is very much a story about identity and also a study in loneliness. I loved this book so much. I know that I'm being very vague about this story, but I feel like this is how you have to be when it comes to this book. I will say though, that in order to read this, you have to become quite comfortable with not really knowing what's going on, because for about 90% of this book, you're not gonna know. But trust me, it's part of the experience, and this is such a unique book. It's truly unlike anything that I've ever read. A History of Wild Places is also a book that I've read, and I feel like the fall vibes in this book are pretty immaculate. This book starts off with a very famous and very well-regarded detective that sets out to the forest to find an author that has been missing for quite a long time. But the problem is that in the process of going to look for her, he also goes missing. Years later, we encounter this man called Theo who lives in this reclusive community called Pastoro. Theo is being a little bit naughty, and he kind of goes a little bit beyond the borders of this community, and he encounters an abandoned truck. The truck belonged to this detective. So Theo is really obsessed in trying to figure out what happened to this man and why there was a truck right at their border. And the story pretty much unravels from there. This book was a solid 3.75 stars for me. I do feel like the ending let me down a little bit, but I feel like the journey that you go on is still worth it, and I would still recommend it as a fall read. Next is Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel. Before I get into this book, I do have a very funny story about how this book came to my possession. At the time that it happened, this wasn't funny at all, but now it really is. One day, I was sitting in my house when I suddenly got an Amazon package. I hadn't ordered anything, and I opened the box and it was 3 books. The whole series. There was no note, nothing, just 3 books. And it obviously had my address because it was delivered to me, and it was under my name, but my name looked slightly different from what I use on Amazon. I have 2 last names, and for one of my last names, I use a letter rather than the full name on Amazon, and in this case, it was swapped. The name that was full was the one that I used the letter on Amazon, if that makes sense. And I was so stressed out, convinced that someone had found my address. And I asked my parents, I asked my fiance, and no one, they were like, no, we haven't sent you anything. So I call Amazon, and Amazon is able to tell me that this book is being sent to me by a Greg something. I was so freaked out. I was literally ready to move out of this house. I was like, I have a stalker, I need to get out of here. Like, this is freaking me out. Then I get a call back from Amazon, and they're like,
"Oh, sorry, we just made a mistake. We looked up the wrong order number. This book was actually sent by a insert name."
And it was my sister's name. So this was a gift from my sister, which was so thoughtful of her, but did freak me out for a hot second there. So my sister is very, very smart and she really liked this book. I believe that this is a fantasy with like the Tudors and Anne Boleyn vibes. I'm expecting it to be slightly feminist because that's who my sister is. And I honestly do not think that there is anything more fall than that. A book I'm actually currently reading it, I started like 2 days ago, is Penance by Eliza Clark. I'm really liking this book and I feel like if you're into true crime, you're going to like this book as well. Within this book, you are reading another book about a crime that took place a couple of years ago in a small beach town in England. The crime that happened was extremely brutal and it was committed by 3 teenagers. But because it was committed by teenagers, the trying to get to the bottom of this crime is extremely difficult. There's a lot of like he said, she said, a lot of politics involved, a lot of drama. And this book has a very interesting structure, and also as the reader, you are constantly being confronted and forced to question your own consumption of true crime. It's pretty graphic though, so beware of that, but I do have a feeling that I'm really going to enjoy this book. A Brief Story of Living Forever by Yaroslav Kalfar is a book that I was sent a couple of months ago. I had never heard about it, but I do feel like it would be the perfect fall read, and I'm excited to hopefully read it this fall. Also, I really like this title. And I feel like this will be a really good fall read if you want to read a book that feels like fall, but you don't really want to read like a romance or a thriller or horror book. This is what this book is about. When Adela contracts a terminal illness, her thoughts turn to Teresa, the daughter she gave up at birth 40 years earlier. Leaving behind her moody, grown son, Roman, in their rural village, she tracks down her daughter in New York City. But the America of 2029, with its authoritarian government and closed borders, is a different place from the country she experienced as a young woman, when she eloped with a filmmaker and starred in his cult sci-fi movie. Teresa, the star researcher for a secretive biotech company hell-bent on discovering the key to immortality, is overjoyed to reunite with her mother. But before she can find a cure, her mother dies mysteriously and is whisked away to a mass grave for undocumented immigrants in the swampy Florida wastelands. Distraught, Teresa travels to the Czech Republic to convince Roman, the brother she's never met, to defy the law and the odds and return their mother's remains to the Czech soil. However, I do feel like she's gonna try to find a way to bring her mom back to life. Don't quote me on that, but I have a feeling like that's what's going to be because I read a review. I don't want to spoil anything, but I feel like that happens. And I think it's going to be fantastic. Next is The Devil Takes You Home by Gabino Iglesias. The description of this book kinda gives me Breaking Bad vibes, but like make it paranormal. It's about this father who is really desperate to find a way to pay for his daughter's hospital bills. She's very sick, and obviously everyone knows that hospital bills in America are absurd. So he decides to work as a hitman, and he accepts this impossible mission that is either going to leave him $200,000 richer or with a bullet in his head. Things are never quite as they seem, and I think that this book will take like some paranormal twists because this is described as Stephen Graham Jones meets Silvia Moreno Garcia, and I love both of those authors, so I have a feeling I'm going to love this one as well. I've heard very good things, and I mean, this is a fall book. House of Hollow by Crystal Sutherland is a book that I've been meaning to read for a very long time. It's a story about 3 sisters who suffered some form of like traumatic event when they were children, but they can't remember what happened to them. All they know is that when they resurfaced, they all had this like identical half-moon scars in the base of their throats. When they're older, one of the sister goes missing, and they quickly realize that the only way for them to find her is to really uncover what happened to them when they were little. I've heard great things about this book, and I feel like I don't even have to say why this book is perfect for fall. I Have Some Questions for You by Rebecca Mackay is a book that has received a lot of mixed reviews, but I read it, and for whatever reason, it really worked for me and I really enjoyed it. In this book, we are following this film producer and podcaster who is invited to return to her boarding school to teach a course. However, she has been avoiding this boarding school, avoiding thinking about it since she left, because when she was there, her roommate was murdered, and that obviously was very traumatic for her, so she has tried her whole life to forget about the things that took place there. But she accepts the job, and when she does, she finds herself deep in this rabbit hole of trying to like figure out if she really agrees with the way this crime was solved, and if she thinks they send the right men to prison. She is coming to terms with things that she never really allowed herself to think of before, but also trying to hold herself accountable to the ways in which she might have played a part into this crime occurring. This book also has a sort of like dark academia kind of vibes because you're spending a lot of time on campus. This also has very, very valid and interesting commentary on true crime and our consumption of this genre. And it was a book that really worked for me. In fact, it consumed my life when I was reading it. All I wanted to do was read this book, so I do highly recommend it, even though it does get some mixed reviews. Legendborn by Tracy Deonn is one of my favorite YA books of all time. I'm gonna quickly read the synopsis for this book because I feel like I couldn't really explain it as well, so here we go. After her mother dies in an accident, 16-year-old Bree Matthews wants nothing to do with her family memories or childhood home. A residential program for bright high schoolers at UNC Chapel High seems like the perfect escape, until Bree witnesses a magical attack on her very first night on campus. A flying demon feeding on human energies. She also encounters a secret society of so-called Legendborn students that hunt the creatures down, and a mysterious teenage mage who calls himself a Merlin and who attempts and fails to wipe Bree's memory of everything she saw. This is a fantastic book. It's also like a King Arthur retelling, but it's so much better than King Arthur. This book is fast-paced, is dark academia, is so twisty, and it has fantastic commentary on race, privilege, and heritage. And I just love this series so much. Both books left me so surprised when I read it, and I just cannot wait for the third book in this series to come out. Night's Edge by Liz Karen is also a book that I got sent a couple of months ago and I had never heard about before, but I'm pretty sure this book involves vampires. It's a story about a girl who desperately wants to escape her mom's home, and she's given that opportunity somehow, but I'm pretty sure her mom is a vampire. I'm pretty sure. I honestly don't know a lot about this book, clearly, but this book was described as being a gruesome and surprisingly heartfelt page-turner, which really interests me. And honestly, it doesn't get much more fall than gruesome and vampires. Mr. Magic by Kirsten White also has such a fantastic cover, but this is a book that really intrigues me because I love books that have like different timelines in which we are following characters when they are kids, and then the same characters get back together as adults to try to figure out what happened when they were children. And I feel like that's what this book is going to do. This story takes place 30 years after a tragic accident that shut down the production of a classic children's show called Mr. Magic. There were only 5 members that survived, and they have spent their whole lives trying to forget about what happened to them when they were on that set. but they haven't really been able to move on from that. But something brings all of these people back together. They somehow meet at this other filming production. They're just forced to come to terms with everything that happened back then to try to figure out who Mr. Magic is and what just went down that day. I have pretty high expectations for this book, and I feel like this would also make a really good like fall audiobook. And the last book is The Guest by Emma Cline. This is a story, from my understanding, about a woman who gets kicked out from the place where she was living, and she spends a whole summer moving from place to place, but she pretty much causes destruction wherever she passes by. And I have heard very good things about this book. I've heard it's a very compulsive read, and I think I don't have this book, but I feel like it's very short. So I feel like this will be a great like add-on if I just want like a quick fall read. So these are all of the books that I either have read and recommend to you, or books that I really want to read this fall. Let me know in the comments what are some other books that you think I should add to my fall TBR. And if you don't feel like you have any recommendations for me, just leave me a leaf emoji so I know that you made it to the end of this video. Thank you so much for watching. Please like this video and subscribe to my channel as well. And I really hope to see you on my next one. Bye.